So here's a little treat for all of my fans, those current and those to come. A reading of The Darkness of the Soul from the upcoming Rejected for Content 2 from J. Ellington Ashton Press by Michael Fisher. So many lost souls have passed through my doors. Many, but not all of them, needed my special attention, my treatments, you could say. The Ohio Institute for the Criminally Insane, the nut house to the locals, was a local legend for what it held. Only the worst of the worst came to the institute, those so far damaged they were unable to be prosecuted for their crimes. Most of the inmates were men, twisted minds kept drugged into complacency. There was a small unit for women and children, but that was rarely full. The staff cherished their shift on that unit, as it tended to be the most sedate, with few exceptions. The 6 sections that provided the men's residences took care of a variety of inmates. The easiest was a total care unit, occupied by the catatonics and low-intelligence cases, not to mention those who had been lobotomized to relieve them of their proclivities. It ran the gamut all the way to the solitary isolation units for the most dangerous, the most self-destructive, the most homicidal. It was this last group that was of the greatest interest to the head of the facility, Dr. Carl Buechner. Dr. Buechner, only having been an American since the early 50s, came from Germany by way of Brazil. Rumors of his activity during World War II were spoken of in hushed whispers. Those who spoke of him feared reprisals should the white-haired man find out. Buechner, of course, knew of the rumors. He had started them himself when he arrived. Buechner had aged prematurely. He was only in his early teens when the Reich fell. Certainly he had served in the Hitlerjugend, but service was compulsory for all boys of a particular age. If he had chosen to resist, he would have been sent to one of the work camps himself. The rumors that circulated spoke of the middle-aged man as if he were Mengele's protege. If the staff feared what they thought he was, they wouldn't have a clue of how scary a monster was in their midst. Der Totest Engel had nothing on the aspirations of Dr. Buechner, the White Devil, der Weissteufel, in his own mind. The lunatics in the asylum were the worst of the worst, and were unlikely to be missed by society, and, should the damage be noticed, it would be seen as justifiable punishment for their crimes. To Dr. Buechner, they were simply clay to be molded in his hands. Buechner sat at his desk, the dim room lit only by a banker's lamp, its green glass shade casting the rest of the room in a sickly glow. A handful of records were scattered across his desk. The weekly review of both the new patients, as well as those who the staff felt might be in need of his personal attentions. The doctor picked up a random folder. An older man named Price, a Korean War veteran whose hallucinations kept him in their thrall, a lunatic of the classic sense. Buechner shook his head and tossed the file to the side before taking up the next. The next file was a middle-aged man named Tyler who told stories of a mad woman named Victoria who was controlling his life. He said she was desirable beyond belief, but that no matter what she asked him to do, and he would do it, yet could not make any progress with her. None of his friends or family had ever met this mystery woman, and, after he killed an indigent at her request, Tyler had been arrested and sentenced to Buechner's care. He placed his file on top of the last, having no use for a man being manipulated by his own hallucinations. Another veteran, this one from the war currently raging in Vietnam. He flipped it open to see the young man's name was Guglik. His intake photo showed a haunted face, damaged by the horrors witnessed in those steamy jungles thousands of miles from home. A quick glance showed that he had been temporarily assigned to the institute, awaiting final judgment after beating a man to death in a bar fight. He also saw that he had a wife and daughter in Virginia. No good, he muttered, throwing it on top of the first. The next folder brought a smile to his wrinkled face. A young boy, slim with dark hair, smiled from the photo. Tommy Butcher, 8 years old, had burned down his house while his parents slept. The boy had confessed to the crime, not showing the slightest regret for the act. He said that his parents beat him and they deserved what they had gotten. The courts felt differently. He had been remanded to the Institute for Care until he reached 14, when he would be transferred to the prison system. Buechner looked into those sparkling eyes and recognized what he saw: the face of a pure psychopath. One unadulterated by the rules of society gazed back. The youthful smile showed that not only did the boy lack remorse for the killing, he'd enjoyed the act of taking a life, two in this case. With some guidance from der Weissteufel, the boy could grow into something great, a creature to be feared, one that would go down in the history books. He gently set the file off to the left side of the oak desk. He would be paying young Tommy a visit this afternoon. The next folder he took up held a photo of a thin young man. Smears of white makeup remained on his face, red from having been freshly scrubbed. The name was Giuseppe Pagliacci. Although he was known as Joseph Page here in America, he had immigrated from Italy as a child, settling down in Cleveland with his parents. Joe Page had been committed to the Institute for desecration of the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. When he was arrested, he screamed about how the papists had it all wrong. They were worshipping a false god and it must be destroyed. The evidence photos showed that he had spray-painted the crucifix with red letters that read, "Praise Jesus," which seemed odd considering his diatribe. Even more oddly, the first S in Jesus looked as much like a B or figure 8 as it did an S. All in all, the damages to the cathedral totaled over $5,000 and had, combined with his ranting, warranted psychiatric supervision. Once he had been remanded to the custody of the Institute, Page had gone downhill quickly. He had somehow gotten his hands on a sliver of broken glass and carved his own face into a Chelsea grin, slashing the corners of his mouth halfway up his cheeks. It didn't matter how many times the clinic sutured them up, Page tore the wounds open again. He spent his days in a straitjacket now, although the gashes never closed, leaving him with a very disturbing smile that never left his face. Even when he was drugged with Thorazine to the point of unconsciousness, that wicked grin still leered up at the staff. Buechner set Page's file on top of Butcher's. A visit with the disturbed young man would come soon as well. A loud knock interrupted his silence, jolting him upright. "Ja," he called out, his German accent undiminished by the 20 years he had been an American. "Who is it? What do you need?" The frosted glass window showed a smaller, round shape with a head that came to a peak. It was likely one of his nursing staff. He pushed the remaining files off to the right as the door swung open, revealing a stocky youth. The slightly taller nurse stood behind, the crown of her cap completing the odd silhouette. "Please come in," Buechner said, waving his hand toward the straight-back wooden chair across the desk from his own plush leather-upholstered chair. The young man shuffled into the room and plopped down hard on the seat, his dark hair falling in front of his eyes. The nurse, a rather plain woman in starched white, crossed the office, handing over the folder she held. "Thank you, Nurse Foster," he said with a smile that did not reach his cold gray eyes. She replied with a nod. "Of course, Dr. Buechner." She backed out of the room, almost as if she were afraid to turn her back on the man. Buechner opened the file to see the photo clipped to the top of the record. He glanced up to see an identical image seated before him. "So, Jason," he began. His voice elicited no reaction from the shape. "That is your name, correct? Jason Harrigan?" A slight nod was the only acknowledgement he received. The doctor was certain he saw a glimmer of cold eyes staring from behind the brown fringe the boy tried to hide behind. "Your record says you have been sent to me because you did something to one of your classmates at Marshall University. Would you like to tell me what you did?" A small shake of Jason's head accomplished two things. It showed his disagreement to the request, but more importantly, it allowed Buechner to see those black eyes, sunken and heavily shadowed. He knew the look in those eyes very well. He saw that emptiness every day in his patients, as if there were no soul inside. He saw that the gaze in his own mirror in the morning. "I know what you did. It was an act for which you have been condemned," Buechner said. "You disemboweled the quarterback of the football team and ate his heart. The campus security officers had to pull you off of his corpse. It took them He checked the record quickly. 5 of them to get you off, young Mr. Carson. The boy nodded again. Buchner thought he saw a slight smile turn up the corners of the boy's mouth, but it could have been wishful thinking. Why would you do such a thing? The chunky youth mumbled but was completely unintelligible. Excuse me, Buchner said, all emotion dropping from his voice. If you are speaking to me, you will use a loud, clear voice. Do you understand? Jason nodded his head again, his mouth set in a definite frown. Now, will you please tell me why you killed Benjamin Carson? Harrigan's empty eyes burned through his bangs, burned with a feral hatred reserved for the most abhorrent things. He deserved it, Jason shouted. He deserved to die because he was a horrible little man. Go on, Buchner replied. He wouldn't leave me alone. He constantly tormented me for being fat, for being a freak. One time he told me to try out for the team, said I'd be good on the defensive line. When I showed up to dress out, the coach chewed me out while I stood there in a jockstrap and socks. He laughed at me for even thinking I could be on his team. He said I was a fat, worthless waste of flesh and to get out of his locker room. When I tried to get my clothes from my locker, Carson snatched them away and took off out the door. I tried to catch him, but I didn't realize it was a trap. A trap, you say? Buchner asked. He'd finally gotten the young man to open up and let out some real emotion. Yeah, a trap. He ran down the hall, and before it clicked in my head what happened, I was surrounded by them. Them? Who is them? You know, all the popular kids. The jocks and cheerleaders and all. Them. Even the geeks were laughing at me. To all them, I was just some fat loser who was into scary movies and Sabbath. Sabbath? You're religious? The doctor asked. Nah, man, Jason replied. Sabbath. Black Sabbath, the band. Paranoid, Iron Man. He looked astounded that the obviously educated man behind the desk had never heard of Black Sabbath. I am sorry, Jason, but rock and roll is really not to my tastes. It is too loud and jarring for my sensibilities. I am content with orchestral compositions, such as Richard Wagner and Karl Orff. My father took me to see a production of Carmina Burana at the Alte Opera in Frankfurt when I was but only 9 years old. It was absolutely magical. He placed his hands firmly on the desk as if to stabilize himself. I am sorry for the interruption. Please continue with your story. You said these popular students harassed you for how you look and your choice in music? Harrigan nodded. I had to run all the way back to my dorm in just a jock and socks. It was the most embarrassing day of my life. It didn't help that my room keys are in my jeans and Benny took off with. Benny? Ah, Mr. Carson, you mean. Yeah, Benny Carson. The pride and joy of the Marshall lineup. Ever since that plane crash last year, he'd been in the spotlight. Pulled up from JV to fill in the opening left when they all went down in flames. I knew what I had to do. I had to vacate that spot again. So what did you plan to do, Mr. Carson? Buchner asked. I tried reporting it to the dean's office after my roommate got back and let me in. I had to go get a new key anyway. When I got there, I found my clothes had been turned into lost and found, so I got my wallet and keys back. All my money was gone, though. I asked the office how to file a complaint, but they played it off as a harmless prank. I showed them just how harmless it was, Harrigan said with a wicked grin. The doctor said, tapping the end of his pen against his lips, as if in deep thought. So I can understand the desire for revenge, perhaps even the desire to take his life. What inspired you to eat his heart? When I was a kid, my dad would take me hunting with him. You know, deer, rabbit, squirrel, that kind of thing. Well, the year I got my first buck, I was 14 then, and he said I had to be blooded. 14, Buchner murmured, as he jotted it down on his notepad. 14 was a powerful age for him as well. First time he had taken a life also. A Russian soldier who tried to rape his mother had died with Frau Buchner's kitchen knife buried deep in his back. Blooded. I am not certain I follow. Blooded. It's a superstition my dad said was important. When you kill your first deer, you need to drink its blood while it's still hot. That way you get the power of the deer in you. So why didn't you just drink Mr. Carson's blood? I go so far as to crack his ribs open and eat his heart. It is quite difficult to get through them after all. Some of my dads told us he did it wrong, that you need to eat the heart to get the animal spirit to merge with your own. Buechner nodded. He had heard of this practice before. The legends were not solely American. They were common in Europe as well. I thought if I ate his heart, I'd get the power that he had. The power to become popular. The power to be more than a freak. I was wrong, though. Look at me now. I'm an even bigger freak than ever, on display in the nut house. You're not on display, Mr. Harrigan, Buechner began. In fact, if you'll agree, I see in you the potential to become something so much greater than what you are now. I would like you to be part of a select group of patients. I will give you comfortable quarters, where you will learn from me. Learn from you? Jason asked, tilting his head to the side. What can I learn from you? How to be a loony? No, Mr. Harrigan, Buechner smiled. Society has deemed you a monster. I disagree. Together we will show them how you will be rehabilitated, fit for society. I will teach you to control the reagent side, how to embrace it, and, with the right controls, let it run free when you desire. Most importantly, I will teach you how not to get caught again. Not get caught? Jason asked. You think I'll be let out of here if I do what you say? Not immediately, the doctor replied, but someday you will walk the streets again, the rough core of your heart polished to a shining diamond of pure inner savagery. The popular people will never mock you again. They will fear you, perhaps not by name, but by reputation. They will fear the night in which you will hunt. You're a nutball too, Jason said smugly. What if I don't join your little group? What if I have to tell my lawyer about this offer? First of all, who will they believe? A confirmed cannibal or a respected psychiatrist? Buechner began. Secondly, if you choose to go against me, you will never see the light of day again, at least not in any condition where you even know what it is. Huh? Harrigan asked, his face scrunched in confusion. Two treatments that are quite accepted in the care of homicidal psychopaths are electroconvulsive therapy, shock treatment to the masses, and lobotomy. If the first doesn't wipe out any coherent thoughts, the latter certainly will. So you're blackmailing me, Jason blurted. His features hardened as he accused the white-haired doctor. Of course I am, Buechner replied with an evil grin of his own. I am also making you an offer that will let you walk the streets again, rather than spending your days here in Lima, or worse, executed in either the penitentiary in Columbus or Moundsville as the Marshall Cannibal. You do realize that name has already been attached to you, do you not? It is only by your father's connections with the Hemingfords in New York that your plight has not spread nationwide. I know, Jason replied, his head falling. I'll do what you say. Dr. Buechner stood and walked to Harrigan's side and patted the boy's head like a favorite pet Rottweiler. We will do great things together, Mr. Harrigan. Great things indeed. Now, if you please, I would like you to retire to your new room until we have our first session. Jason looked up to see the tall, pale man standing over him and felt a chill rush down his spine. Why do I feel like I just made a deal with the devil? Because you did, Jason, he said, standing taller, letting his accent thicken further. I am known as the Weissteufel in my native tongue, the white devil in yours. Do not fear, for those who choose to call me such things will be the ones who will learn to fear you. Well, you and my other apprentices. Dr. Buechner turned, opened the door, and called down the hallway for the escort to return. As she approached, she slowed to a stop 6 feet away from the doctor, well out of arm's reach. He gave the nurse his warmest smile, which wouldn't melt an ice cube. She shivered in response. Nurse Foster, please escort young Mr. Harrigan to my private wing, and make sure he is comfortable in his new room. It is time for my private session with Tommy Butcher. Today we are discussing, shall we say, cleanliness, Buchner said, with a chuckle. They say it is next to godliness, and we all want to be like God, do we not? He closed his office door behind himself once the slim nurse guided the now smiling Jason Harrigan down the hallway to his new quarters. He turned the key in the lock and pocketed it. Buchner straightened his white coat and strolled after them, whistling the opening to O Fortuna, while twirling a scalpel in the fingers of his left hand. And thus completes The Darkness of the Soul. Thank you for watching.